Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1476 of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday. And today's show is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they will throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. And I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast to please make us your first listen each and every day and subscribe across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And today's podcast is sort of a special edition. I am joined by Howard Beck. Howard's covered the NBA for decades at this point. He's the Locked on NBA podcast insider for the playoffs and the offseason, and generally knows a lot of things about the NBA and covers the sport at a very, very high level. We talk about the Hawks and kind of where they stand at this point in time, Quin Snyder, Trae Young, etc. And it's a fun conversation. So with no further delay, you'll have the intro. I'll be back with myself and Howard Beck.
You are Locked on Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm joined now by National NBA Insider. Is that the best way to describe you, Howard Beck? Howard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Insider, old dude who's covered the league for a long time, whatever, all those things work.
I appreciate you doing this, and I know you've made lots of rounds around the Locked on Podcast Network, and we'll plug all that stuff as well. But we'll dive right in. I mean, normally, as I'm sure you've experienced, these shows are pretty geared to diehards of the specific teams, and we go into a lot of depth. But I do try to mix in kind of the big picture as well sometimes. And I want to start by kind of asking you what the perception is for you, and also what maybe the national perception is around the Hawks right now after kind of a weird season.
Yeah, and listen, it's probably not much different of a perception than Hawks fans have, which is, man, this team seems like it should be a lot better than it is.
Yes, agreed.
and that's been the case the last couple of years. It's a really tough thing, and it's interesting to watch the parallels actually between the Hawks and the team they beat in the playoffs a couple of years ago, the one in my backyard, the Knicks, because neither of them were expected to have gone as far as they did in that postseason. Obviously, the Hawks a little bit further than the Knicks, but neither of them were expected to be teams that were ready to make the breakthrough to the extent that they did, and it set a bar almost too high. So the Knicks regressed and missed the playoffs a year ago. They finally get back in this year. Now everything seems fine again. The Hawks regressed and seem like they just haven't quite recovered. And of course, they made a major trade, a gamble of sorts in the meantime, by acquiring DeJounte Murray. Then they make a coaching change in the middle of this season. And yet the result is still the same. It's all right. Maybe they overachieved with that playoff run a couple of years ago. They were, are they ahead of schedule, or did they just have everything break their way? Right. Kind of like the Mavericks last year too, right? Like I didn't buy the Mavericks really as a Western Conference Finals team, but they made it. Did they but it's the same effect. It raises the bar too high too soon. Now it's, the next thing should be either making conference finals at minimum again or making the finals. The Hawks weren't ready yet. And they overachieved in a weird season with no fans in the building a couple of years back. And that said, the talent is there. And every year, every offseason, we do the same exercise. You assess all these teams, you look at their talent on paper, and you go, yeah, this team looks like it should be, wherever, top four in the East. Middle of the East somewhere, and the Hawks just, it's just a baffling phenomenon that they have been lesser than the sum of their parts. And if I look at a team that has talent historically in this league, that has the kind of top line talent and depth for that matter, that to me projects as, whatever, top 5, top 6, wherever you want to put them. We don't even have to say that they're up there with Boston, Milwaukee, Philly. But they should be somewhere in that mix. Like on paper, are they really that much behind, or should they even be behind, say, the Cavs and Knicks, who were the 4th and 5th seeds? If that's the case, if our perception of their talent does not match up with the results, then either we've overestimated the talent, I don't think that's the case, or there's something else wrong. And often that is, like, if you're not better than the sum of your parts, almost by definition, there's a chemistry issue. The parts just don't fit. And so the onus for the front office, and it's, look, it's an evolving and now younger front office, and it's a new head coach with a lot of juice. that brain trust now has to kind of sort that out. All right. They probably feel the same thing. When we look at this roster, we think it should be better than a 500 team in a first or in a, either a play-in team or a first round playoff out. We think we should be better than this. So what do we got to sort out? So that to me is the agenda for the summer for the Hawks. You asked about overall impressions. I mean, that's the top line. The rest of it, I think, is just kind of, I think the league in general has had an eye on the Hawks because there's the perennial John Collins trade discussions, and people are kind of waiting for that shoe to drop. There's the curiosity about whether they are truly sold on Trae Young long-term. That conversation, depending on who you're talking to, might feel a little premature, or just kind of put a pin in it and we're going to keep an eye on it. And I think there's a lot of curiosity about what this Hawks team looks like, not just in terms of personnel, but what a full training camp with Quinn Snyder and time for him to implement all his stuff looks like. So those are the broad strokes for me.
Yeah, there's a lot to hit on, but before we get into some future, because lots of future stuff, of course, there's been a talking point, I think, locally, and I've made it probably too, about how they played in the postseason. It's a small sample size, but I mean, what do you think about the concept of basically having kind of a proof of concept with how they played against Miami in a 1-game sample size that they won, but also against Boston, like kind of pushing them, and maybe some of that was Boston. But what do you make of that as kind of like, okay, maybe this is what this actually should look like a little bit more?
Yeah. And then, look, they were never, I admire the feistiness in the Boston series. But it's not like they were really in the Boston series, right? Like there were moments there, and we're all looking at it through the prism of the Celtics, because the Celtics had the most talent, not just in that series, but the most talent of any playoff team this season, I think. And so it was more about like, what are the Celtics doing? And we're seeing it again and again, right? We just literally saw it again last night. They're one of these, there's one of these teams, and I've seen them in the past, and I cut my teeth as an NBA beat writer on a team like this, a team that didn't know how to handle prosperity. That was the Shaq and Kobe Lakers, where they were constantly, except for one postseason where they just mowed everybody, but they were constantly screwing around and losing games they shouldn't lose against teams that they had much better talent than. And the Celtics feel that way. And so I want to give the Hawks credit for finding a little bit more of an identity, perhaps, finding a little bit more fight, starting to show some signs of what they could be by winning that play-in game, by pushing the Celtics to 6 games. But I still feel at my gut that was more about the Celtics, a much more talented and potent team, just not knowing how to handle prosperity, and they keep doing this. That said, I was rereading some of the coverage right in the wake of the Hawks losing to the Celtics, and I think what really stands out is that you and I could talk about, hey, proof of concept, or is this something to build off of, and it will matter not at all if the Hawks themselves don't believe it. And I think what struck me was just the way that they themselves did look at it as not just some media cliche that we could superimpose, but they themselves felt like, something's starting to come into focus here, and including Trae Young's comments about Quinn Snyder and how enthusiastically he seemed to express his belief in Quinn in a way that maybe we didn't hear Trey talk about his first 2 NBA coaches.
Yep.
That might matter a bit. I don't, by the way, to me, that's a reflection on Trey and not those coaches. Like Nate McMillan's a great coach. And I think Lloyd Pierce, while it was his first NBA head coaching job, Lloyd's got a very bright future ahead of him in this league. And obviously is still an assistant coach in this league. So I don't think it was a reflection on them as much as Trey needing to, and this is not unique to him. A lot of young players, especially a lot of young players who are offensive superstars, especially guys with the ball in their hands and have a lot of responsibility that goes with that. It takes a while for them to figure certain things out. And it takes a while for them to find a coach or to maybe to just mature or evolve to the point where they accept coaching in a way that maybe they're not ready to when they're a 19-year-old rookie or a 20-year-old rookie. But I thought that coming out of that first round loss to the Celtics and having shown some fight and pushing the Celtics to 6 games, whether that's the Celtics messing up or whether it's the Hawks pushing them, whether it's a combination of the two, if the Hawks come out of that feeling like we are starting to figure something out here, it's hard to say that momentum carries from April to October, but I think there's probably something to that. There are some foundational blocks there.
Today's show is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs is fantastic, bringing fit, comfort, and versatility to the table with their products across the board. I feel fantastic wearing Bird Dogs, and the stretchy fabric in their shorts gives me a ton of comfort with the ability to wear the same shorts in different situations without having to worry really at all. I'm not someone who wants to stress too much about what I'm wearing on a daily basis, and I also want what I'm wearing to actually make sense and feel good on me. Bird Dog definitely makes sure to check all those boxes for me each and every time. I'm not a dad, but I also hear people in my life, and they're perfect pants for dads as well. So if you're into that sort of thing, it makes perfect sense. So with that said, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. When you get there, enter the promo code LockedOnNBA at checkout. When you do that, you'll have a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every single order. One more time, check out birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. You know, we talk about Quinn Snyder. It's obviously he's the big domino that changed in season going into next year, and the Hawks moved quickly. And I don't think anybody criticized them for doing that, but you know, it starts to look like it's even a better decision. I love the hire when it happened, to be candid, but now that a quarter of the league or something like that has turned over, does it even look better that they kind of moved quickly and didn't have to worry about Phoenix and Milwaukee battling for Quinn Snyder?
Yeah, I mean, look, if Quinn had made it to this stage of the year without having been hired. I mean, listen, if the Hawks had not fired Nate McMillan and hired Quin Snyder when they had, they probably would have hired Quinn by now anyway. Probably, right? Like
Maybe, yeah.
their season still would have ended before everybody else. I'm trying to think, like nobody else is actually, aside from Ime Udoka, who was also obviously a hot commodity, if certainly one with some asterisks because of the way things ended in Boston. Ime and Quinn would have been the two big fish in the coaching pool. But then again, we just saw a bunch of championship caliber coaches, including guys with actual championships, and Budenholzer, Nick Nurse, like all these other guys got canned, and Monty Williams got canned. So suddenly there's a wealth of high level coaching talent, accomplished coaches on the market. I'm not saying that the Hawks were wrong to hire Quinn when they did, and they probably did themselves a favor by making sure that they had secured him before. Like, listen, we could have got to the offseason. They could have lost a couple weeks ago and then immediately pivoted to Quinn. And Quinn might have said, you know what, hold on. I want to see what's going on in Milwaukee first, because Milwaukee, to the shock of everybody, went down around the same time, right? So, yeah, they could have faced more competition. They also could have had more high-level options, right? Maybe they would have liked to talk to they're probably not bringing Bud back, but
Yeah.
but Nick Nurse, Monty Williams, maybe they would have liked to chase Ime. So they closed off other avenues, but they also got one of the best coaches in the league. So I don't think there's anything really to second guess there, to be honest. It was probably the right move at the right time, albeit a very unusual one. Most teams are content to go right out the season with an interim if they fire a guy. And then sometimes they take the interim tag off and give that guy the full-time job, like we saw with Jacques Vaughn in Brooklyn. But I think this is one of those it's a rare case period, right? Like I don't see this happen very often. But it feels like they made the right move.
Yeah, I tried to do some research on it when it happened, just to see, like, this never happens. Like, a guy that is as accomplished as he was coming in midseason, just a very odd circumstance. And I think they all acknowledged it too, including Quinn. He's like, this is a little bit weird. We all kind of know that.
Yeah.
Taking a step out of that though, did you like the hire? What do you think of the way that he might match with this roster with Trey? And I think you mentioned Trey praising him, and I noticed that too. But what do you make of the whole sort of combination there?
Yeah. So look, I don't know Quinn well, and I didn't spend a lot of time around that team while he was in Utah. But the reputation speaks for itself. His the esteem his peers have around the league speaks for itself. The track record in Utah was fantastic, obviously. And maybe there are some parallels too, where, Donovan Mitchell, like Trae Young, different kinds of players, but, ball dominant point guards or ball dominant guards, let's just say, who are going to score a lot, but all these also then have to learn to be great playmakers. Trae Young's obviously, I think, a much more skilled and intuitive passer than Donovan Mitchell. And so maybe there was more of a learning curve in the NBA for Donovan to figure out that balance. But Trey's still trying to figure out that balance. And Quinn is a very meticulous coach. So I think the fact that Quinn was able to build that trust and rapport with Donovan in Salt Lake is a good template for, what to expect or what he might be able to do with Trey. And again, as we've talked about, Trey's really positive, enthusiastic endorsement of him bodes well in that regard. Quinn Snyder is known for, like I say, he's meticulous. His practices are very detail oriented. He will stop things a lot in order to get things right. It's from what I'm told, it's down to like really minute details about timing and angles and everything. And so, with the wrong group, that could wear on you, and you might lose them. But I also think that if this is a group, starting with Trey, but everybody, if they're really ready for that kind of coaching, to say, look, hey, maybe all these folks talking about us as underachievers, maybe we agree with that too. How do we snap out of that? Well, maybe we should buy into this coach. And I think that's the thing. It's not that Nate didn't have a track record. Nate McMillan didn't have a track record of success. He certainly did, and he got a bunch of those Pacers teams to outright overachieve during his time there. But maybe with what they just saw with Quinn, guiding those Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert teams deep in the playoffs a couple of times, maybe there's going to be more buy-in from day one. It's hard to know, right? But Quinn is definitely going to. So as I understand it, the way that scouts who were closer to this or watched the Hawks at a more detailed level have conveyed this to me, they expect that Quinn's system, which has got a lot more complexity to it, will be in full bloom next season, but that it was clear that he had stripped it down when he got to Atlanta. Like, he was not trying to force things too quickly and give them too much too soon. And so I think, as we're all sitting here curious about what they might look like in the fall, and the personnel is going to be the first part of that, right? They have some decisions to make this offseason, I think. But how they play in October will be really interesting to see, because whatever they were doing, in their first run of 20-something games with Quinn is going to look different, I think, than what we're going to see in the fall once he's had a chance to really implement his playbook.
Yeah, I mean, to back you up, I think that guys were pretty effusive in kind of noticing that he was putting certain things in. And I think DeJounte and Trey in particular were, even with the media, saying like they were impressed by like the way that he came in immediately and was pointing out stuff that they had never really heard before. Not in a bad way, but just kind of, he was very observant, and kind of that speaks to that. I do want to ask about the other kind of maybe role for Quinn Snyder, and that is, there's been a little bit of rumbling that he is going to probably have some personnel juice in a way that, Nate and Lloyd did not have, but he doesn't have a title. That was notable when he was hired. But you have this first time front office with Landry Fields and Kyle Korver. And of course, Kyle played for Quinn in Atlanta. How do you, at least from what you can hear or glean, does Quinn, what kind of voice is he going to have in that front office? Because it's kind of an interesting setup where he's the big fish, so to speak, but not necessarily in the traditional title of GM or whatever. But obviously, he's going to be in the room. So what do you think of that setup?
Yeah, I know they're very sensitive to this. There's been there's been some I think very good, aggressive, and by all accounts accurate reporting about the kind of muddled power structure there. And, that aspects of that may have led to Travis Schlenk being pushed out in the first place, right? So they need to sort that out. Whether it's, the owner, the owner's son, Landry Fields, Kyle Korver, Quinn Snyder, any other voices that are still floating around. They do need to figure that out. It's funny. So the positive version, the constructive version of the too many voices would be hey, remember when Jerry West was with the Warriors early on in their, in the the Strength in Numbers years, mixing up my Warriors slogan era associations. There was this idea of like, have a lot of people at the table who are all smart people, and then Bob Myers can take it all in, filter it, and he's still the ultimate decision maker, but you've got some other potent, creative, respected voices in the room with a lot of experience. And so the positive version of that is where you just get a lot of people in there and you battle this stuff around. Everybody's got a voice. Coaching staffs will sometimes work this way too. It's not some top-down thing. And that could be, there's a really constructive version of that. Then there's the dysfunctional version of that. And I've seen that over the years in the league as well, where there's either just not a clear decision maker, or the person who's making, or the guy who has the highest title, it doesn't have the personality, or is kind of a weaker leader. Or you've got people who are gunning for that job. And I'm not suggesting any of those things are true with the Hawks, but I will say that the perception of them for the last year or so has been that it has been more of the muddled version, leaning toward dysfunction, than it has been the, hey, we've just got, the team of rivals or something. And so Landry is young. Landry's young enough that I remember covering him when he was with the Knicks, and Jeremy Lin was sleeping on his couch. Or maybe that's just a reflection of how old I am, or how quickly time flies. So this is Landry's first chance to be, in that seat. And between him and Korver, I think Quinn Snyder, by definition, just by the experience he has, I think he had a pretty strong voice in Utah as well. He doesn't need a title. I don't think that part of it matters. I think, and look, I don't know what conversations were on his way in. I would imagine that he probably asked for, if not by definition or in contract, but I would imagine he had some requests about, listen, I'm going to want to have a serious voice in personnel. I'd be shocked if he didn't. Mm-hmm. And especially with a younger front office, they should be leaning on him some, and they should ultimately make the decisions. And you do need a hierarchy that makes sense and that's consistent. But yeah, I would expect Quinn Snyder's going to have some serious say in personnel. And maybe on day one, it's going to be more just what every coach does, which is evaluate what they've got, having been in the locker room and having been through practices and everything. And you go back to the front office in the offseason and you say, listen, here's why I think these guys fit and these guys don't, or here's why we need a slight upgrade here, whatever. The impressions that you're getting at the coaching level are going to be a little different. You're going to convey all that to your front office. The difference is, in some places, you then can tell the front office, this guy's going. Not I think he has to go. Not my opinion is he doesn't fit. It's just, we're moving on. Mm-hmm. Because, as you note, Quinn was not given another title that tied him to the front office. Also, maybe it's not at that level, but I'd be shocked if he didn't have an understanding on his way in with them that, I'm going to need to be able to push a few buttons here.
Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every single player is a perfect fit for your roster. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part has to fit just right for you. The next time you're looking for parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every single part that you need fits perfectly and does so the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, look for the green check to know that part will be fitting, or your money will be coming back to you. Just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when it comes to shopping at eBay Motors. They have over 122 million parts to choose from. You'll be back in the game in no time with eBay Motors. After all, it's easier to bring home a win when the right parts are actually guaranteed for you. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. One more time, that is ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. I think I'm contractually obligated to ask about Trae Young, since you brought it up earlier. Of course, that's the national topic du jour with regard to the Hawks, other than front office maybe, and kind of what his status is. There was a little bit of, I'm not even sure it was reporting buzz or whatever, that he could be, on the block at some point soon. He was pretty upbeat at the end of the season. There's no indication that he's going to be asking out or anything like that. So I'll just leave it broad. What do you think of Trae's status as, obviously the number one guy in the organization, but future, short term, all that stuff?
Yeah. Look, we all love to sit around, especially in the dog days of the season in like January, February, and speculate on where things are headed. And I remember having conversations with people around the league about like, are we starting to reach the point where they're going to have to because I think this was right before Nate got fired. And then maybe certainly after he got fired, where it was if you're a young star and you're third head coach in a short span, when do you start to think about, as an organization, maybe it's not the coaches, maybe it's our star player, and so I think those kinds of conversations speculatively happen around the league, right? Where people are keeping an eye on it, how long they're going to hang on to him, how many chances is he going to get, how many coaches are going to get fired, how many different teammates are they going to cycle through, even the DeJounte Murray thing, right? You get DeJounte Murray presumably so that you can take some of the defensive pressures off of Trey, because Trey's not going to play defense. So DeJounte, okay, now we've got a defender in the backcourt. He's got some length. He can play on or off the ball. Trey can play a little more off the ball, blah, blah, blah. You could do all these different things. And it seems like, at a glance, something that helps strengthen you. I got to admit that somewhere in the midst of the season, when we're having all these other conversations about the Hawks underachieving, I started to think maybe DeJounte's also their fallback, that, you could trade Trey and you'd have DeJounte to run the offense. I don't know. It's stray thoughts that you bounce off of people around the league. And I didn't get necessarily a lot of pushback. People just kind of said, yeah, that's a direction they could go. As of the last couple weeks, the impression I get from people is that nobody expects that they're going to be doing that anytime soon, right? Like, this is not the moment. You just hired Quinn a few months ago. You're going to give him and Trey a chance to do something, to make some progress here. If Quinn Snyder ends up with the same frustrations with this roster and with Trey in particular that his predecessors had, yeah, eventually you come to a decision as a franchise where you have to entertain that. They're never going to say that publicly because he's the face of the franchise. He's fun to watch. He's a great personality. Like, I wouldn't give up on him either until I absolutely felt like I had to. So the people I've talked to recently don't think that they're in any position or that they're ready to entertain moving off of Trey. So I don't think that's happening. At a minimum, you probably want to get off to a good start, have Trey get off to a good start and everything else. Even if you thought you wanted to trade him, you probably want to kind of, pump his value back up again by showing some success there. All that said, Quinn Snyder doesn't like the ball to stick. Most coaches don't, frankly, but some will make a bigger deal out of it than others. The way it was described to me or assessed to me by one scout was, Trey is not exactly the ideal of a Quinn Snyder point guard. So, okay, fine. That maybe not a fit on day one. The question is still about Trey evolving and Trey and Quinn Snyder meeting each other somewhere halfway. And so that's the thing that everybody I think will have an eye on when next season opens.
That all makes sense, and I'll get you out of here on this one. But I mean, it's kind of going not necessarily with Trey, but there's been a lot of talk about the roster and how many changes they want to make, if they want to kind of tweak or maybe overhaul, and maybe Quinn's the major upgrade, and to kind of lean on that to say, look, we know we weren't great this year, but maybe Quinn's our X factor for next year. What do you hear? I mean, you mentioned Collins before. That's the one that everybody talks about all the time. Is that still the most likely domino to fall? Like, what have you heard personnel wise?
I think I said this somewhere a few months back, but it might have been on Zach Lowe's pod, but is John Collins, does he have the all-time record now, or maybe the modern day record for most consecutive years on the trade block without being traded?
He might. It's up there.
I don't even know who the challenger would be to that. But it feels like it. Which is separate from the, will the Wizards ever trade Bradley Beal, or will the Blazers ever trade Dame Lillard? That's a different category. The question of moving off of star player who no longer has, doesn't have enough juice around him, blah, 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 doesn't have enough talent around him. Different one. John Collins, you hate to be the one to say well, this time for sure. But listen, the new front office, new head coach, and clearly some pressures to figure this thing out. And I think the only way they're going to move forward is to start to change out some of these pieces, but also they have some serious tax issues looming besides, and a lot of guys on big contracts. So it feels like to me the most likely thing is John Collins, right? We're going to come right back to that. Eventually the John Collins trade rumors are going to become a John Collins trade. If I had to guess, it's this off season, but we've been wrong so many times before about this.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've kind of framed it is it more likely than not? Probably. Is it 100% likely? I don't think so. You can't say it because we've gotten there before several times. It's kind of the same thing you just said. It's never ending at this point. He's the only one either. I mean, you talked about the tax issues. They have several big contracts that they could look to move, not necessarily Trey, but
yeah. And look, if they have concluded, so we should just note this real quick. The Trey DeJounte thing didn't quite work out. Now, did it not work out as well as it could have? Is there still a better version of this? I don't know. But if the Hawks have any questions in their own mind about whether that was the right gamble and whether it does have promise, and DeJounte's in the final year of his deal, if it didn't work out, look, sunk cost, right? You traded the picks in the swap. Like there's no going back on it. But the worst case scenario is that then he leaves as a free agent next year and you get nothing and you're still out all that stuff. If you traded him, would you be able to get back the equivalent of the stuff you sent out? I don't know. Haven't gone down that road myself, or haven't pulled that around the league. But I do think that is among the other things that they have to kind of confront, is like, all right, the clock is ticking. And, there's, as I understand it, having read some of Bobby Marks' stuff on this, there's really not incentive for DeJounte to sign the extension now because of what he could get as a free agent. All right. So the clock is ticking, and there is risk involved there. If you don't think he's going to want to resign, or if you don't think you want to go to the max or whatever he may ask to resign him. So that's another one to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And the lack of an extension definitely makes things complicated. And there's no fault of anybody's on that. Hawks or DeJounte, it's just they can't get there legally. So it's one of those numbers like Jaylen Brown before the all NBA thing. Anyway, I've taken up a lot of your time. I appreciate you doing this. Please plug whatever you have going on. I know you're busy on Locked On things and writing things. And where can people find your work?
I'm on, I feel like all of the Locked On shows, but I think there's like Locked On hockey and baseball and other stuff too. I'm not on those shows. There's thankfully some limit to my overexposure at this point, but I am bouncing around all of the other Locked On NBA shows. Writing for the moment for GQ Sports, so you can find my stuff at gq.com. I also have an Authory page. That's author with a Y on the end. So authory.com/Howard Beck, and everything that I write, all my GQ stuff, all my previous Sports Illustrated, New York Times, Bleacher Report, everything is all there. So appreciate people going and checking that out as well.
Definitely should be doing that. And thank you again, Howard, for doing this. Please subscribe to this podcast. Follow Howard around the entire network as he makes his rounds. And we'll see everybody next time.